And we are live.
All right.
Back on the screw. Why? It's doing this fucking thing again. Hold on. Yeah. There we go. Now we are live. Back on the screw with Thoth. How the fuck are you guys doing?
Doing wonderful, man. Doing good.
Pretty A-okay. I cannot complain.
Yeah, you know, it's tough. It's the life of a master magician.
Yeah, things are hard.
So we were, having our regular conversations over the interwebs, and we were still trying to nail down what the fuck is consciousness. And I don't know if we still have, but Jason mentioned a book to us called Biocentrism by a guy named Robert Lanza. And I'll probably throw up a link to that here in a minute in the chat room if anyone's out there. So, Jason, why don't you start out? Why don't you tell us from your perspective, what is biocentrism?
All right. So essentially, and I just, there's a second book beyond biocentrism that I finished up this weekend and just got, that just kind of expands more on the paradigm. But biocentrism is a new paradigm. It's a way of looking at the universe, the creation of the universe and consciousness and all these things. They're essentially connected. So a lot about what we were talking about before in consciousness and a lot of our ideas with EMK. I mean, you could definitely say the EMK is a biocentric paradigm. And, I read Biocentrism a couple years ago. Dr. Dave also read parts of it, who was another one of our original thinkers on this project. And we're both really blown away by it. And, not to get in too much to it, but essentially what it says is consciousness creates the universe, not the other way around. The universe is not just a static thing that we all kind of evolved out of, but rather the universe is created through our consciousness. It goes exactly in line with what we were talking about, where you only perceive things through your own consciousness, and that's kind of like very much the same thing that he's talking about, but also the interconnectivity of the universe. Like we're talking about on a subatomic level, 99.9% of our bodies is nothingness. There's nothing there. It's only the electronic charge of my fingertips pressing up against a brick wall. It's like the electromagnetic charge of those atoms that are pushing against each other, creating the illusion of those two things. But outside of consciousness, things like especially time are not relevant. And more or less everything in biocentrism is the same kind of vibe, and essentially the same philosophy that I grokked kind of through my my personal experience through the abyss, as you will. I want to read something out of the new Beyond Biocentrism book. It's a really good line in here, and there's a line that's almost identical to a line in our book. And it says this. It's talking about like understanding what we're talking about, the universe in this kind of way that is not necessarily bound by time and is created by consciousness. And how do you come to that kind of thinking? How do you get into this paradigm? And the chapter in here, or the phrase in here, is, we already know that certain psychedelic drugs seem to do the job, albeit unreliably, since most people who take them have no such experience. Head injury, cognitive brain anomalies, as well as techniques like yoga practices seem capable of altering the state of perception too. So again, what he's saying is almost identical to what we're saying. Psychedelic drugs, near-death experiences, and deep meditative states, altered state of consciousness, lead you to the conclusions of the biocentric universe.
That is certainly that sense of connectedness that you get with psychedelics, that sense of oneness.
Right.
I think is one of the points he was getting at. I also liked his justification for the theory, in that through all the experiments and subatomic particles with the double slit experiment.
Right.
I think most people are familiar with that by now.
Right.
Or should be.
Yeah.
That a particle is either a particle or a waveform, depending on whether or not you're looking at it.
Depend on whether or
So-
not it's observed. And this he goes beyond that. Like if you're you can measure stuff, like you can measure stars that are emitting these same beams from 10 billion years ago. Okay, so it already happened 1 billion years ago. But by studying these waveforms, once you look at them, they take a certain path, even though it happened all the way back in time, which is another interesting concept that he kind of throws around. I want to read another line in here that I really like, which is, there is no universe without perception. Consciousness and the cosmos are correlative. They are one and the same. And that essentially is just kind of ringing the bell of exactly what we were trying to say in so many words. What I find really interesting about biocentrism is that, you know, you've got us, you know, who are not in any kind of way, certainly not me, trained in physics and astrophysics and quantum theory. I have no understanding of the math of these things. But here you've got a guy who's, you know, way advanced in his fields of all this scientific research, you know, the cutting edge of the thinking minds of today. And he's essentially saying the exact same things that we are saying. You know, and also, you know, when you look at Albert Hoffman's book, you know, we talked about a little bit too, the father of LSD, the one that discovered LSD, he's coming to a lot of the same conclusions as well. You know, that same line where he's talking about the psychedelics and also the meditative experience, things like near death, they all kind of lead to the same thing. And I think it's very interesting that, you know, that's like 3 completely different, you know, wavelengths of people that are kind of coming up with the same thing. And I think there's, I don't know if we could say an underlying truth to that, but certainly, certainly these themes are coming up and becoming more popular and reoccurring, not just in magical circles. You know, this is not a black magician that wrote this book. This is a scientist, a physicist.
David, what was your take off of biocentrism?
I enjoyed it at first. It got a little repetitive at the end, but I think the one thing that I kept thinking in my mind was he very much said, you know, as you've already stated, it's our consciousness and our experience that creates the universe. But he seemed to have this this thought or this idea that it took something biological, and I think that. I'm not sure how to state it, but I'm not quite sure it's strictly biological from my perspective or from my viewpoint. Obviously, I have no hard science to back it up, and he's working from a much different perspective, a scientific perspective. But from my perspective, the underlying consciousness isn't necessarily going to be biological per se, but maybe we'll someday discover consciousness at that subatomic level, you know, the smallest particle that makes it all up. Once we discover that, perhaps we'll find that it's synonymous with consciousness. That's kind of been my thought. I mean, since I started exploring with my own consciousness with psychedelics way back in the day. So that's kind of my breakdown on what he was saying. But
yeah, that would be my only beef with it, is that he assigns consciousness only to biological life forms, where I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah,
Did he change that all in the new book?
Yes and no. I mean, but also he's also generally talking about, like, he talks about plant consciousness in the second book, which is something that he was not a believer of, but then essentially has an experience that changes his mind. So it could be that from the time of the first book to the second book, he's kind of come to grasp that a lot. But he talks very much about the entire universe being connected in this consciousness, so that even though what we call consciousness is at first, you know, just in higher life forms, is also in plants. Well, is it in a rock? Well,
right.
You know, he would probably say no, but at the same time, that rock still is part of the universe, which is all part of the same vibrant consciousness. It's one unity. The thing the other thing that I found really that kind of stood out with me is the illusion of time, and the concept that, you know, we're trapped in time, and that is just a constraint of our particular consciousness in this dimension. And he really kind of uses that as kind of a seems to be like a keystone to biocentrism. And again, this is stuff that we were talking about too. This is stuff that we were coming to the same conclusions through black magic and psychedelic experience that, you know, he's coming through quantum physics. Another thing too about the core of of consciousness that I think he brings up, and it's something else that I agree with a lot too, is that I get what you're saying, Zai, that like it's not a biological based thing. It's this other thing, you know, and that eventually, like if we could understand it, eventually once we understand the science enough, I think there's a loop there that you essentially can't there never will be a full scientific understanding of what consciousness is, because we just lack the ability to express what that mystery is, more or less, because it's just kind of too far beyond what our symbol system is. Like again, okay, this is a really good quote that gets right to that. And I didn't want to quote from this all night, but I did highlight a few treats that I thought were really relevant.
Do treat us.
This here, so we think and speak using language, which in turn employs words that are all symbols for something else. This is an adequate process for engineering bridges or asking someone to pass the mustard. Soon it involves something beyond symbolism, such as ecstasy, love, certain empathetic feelings, and certainly the whole shebang. That line in there is almost identical to another one of our lines in our book, where you are talking about, beauty and meaning, things that can never be measured, are the true essence of magic. I think he's kind of saying the same thing there, and he even uses the word magic somewhere in this book, although it's definitely not looked upon the way that we would look upon it. But it's just that I feel that a lot of the new way of thinking about magic in the last 100 years, starting with Crowley, it's the aim of religion, the method of science, and the aim of religion. Okay. And it's like, okay, well, science has been, catching up to all the spiritual stuff, and eventually, like, all this stuff, as we magicians know, is going to be proven by science. And I think that's flawed. It's fatally flawed. If you just go back in history and look at, like, the beginnings of our understanding of the universe, like, at first it was the gods that made the thunderstorms and the gods that made volcanoes. Now we understand, like, the movements between the plates and the earth and condensation, and how, a little bit about how weather forms. And so then our symbols and our way of speaking about these things, it evolves along with that. So it's not so much that, science is proving magic, as magic is always one step ahead. There's not kind of an end to it. There isn't magic. What we call magic, this altering of consciousness, that is what fills in the gaps for the parts that we'll never be able to prove in using string theory or any kind of grand unified theory. It's missing magic, for lack of a better word. And magic deals with realms of things that we cannot explain or communicate with our symbol system, which is either words or language or mudras or facial expressions. Any of the symbols that we use to talk about these things, when we're talking about consciousness and the nature of the universe, the nature of death, these things beyond that, we're working with another point he puts in there too, that they're starting to experience now that the universe is more or less completely expansive, because there's no curvature to the universe. So it's not like a globe, which is leading scientists to believe that if the universe is never ending, we are perceiving literally less than 1%. It's essentially what we can see of the universe that big is 0%. So we literally have, like, we don't even have the capability of building these models, because it's so beyond the sphere of what science is able to do. And magic is kind of like that other part, more or less. At least that's what I've been kind of, contemplating.
Yeah, honestly, what this is kind of leading me to think about is it's sort of like there's always going to be that mysterious edge to it. There's always going to be that level of mysticism, and perhaps that's its way of continuing its own evolution. Because if you ever figured out the entire thing, the game would be up, and what fun would that be? It also reminds me of something you said quite a long time ago, just concerning our inability to communicate these things, and it really is just art and abstractions that we have to try and relay these messages, but or communicate this type of thing to one another. But I do think there's always going to be that level of mysteriousness to it, no matter how far we evolve.
That being said, I do think it behooves the magician to try to understand as much as they can.
Right.
The stereotype of the magician is they're always, reading books and researching things and are very, into, scholarship. And I think that's true. And a lot of people take that to be, well, I should buy every book on magic out there. No, you should not. Okay. You should be reading shit like
You definitely buy ours.
you should buy ours.
Right. You should be reading fiction. You should be reading Burroughs. You should be reading, shit like that. That is as much the study of magic as like books on magic traditional. I absolutely agree with you there. Any classical literature too, and like certainly, a lot of the stuff that's being written now. Biocentrism is an excellent book. A lot of other stuff that's coming out. From the realm of science and physics, Stephen Hawking has some weird and crazy ideas and stuff. Anytime you get into talking about things like black holes, you're talking about 200 years ago, a black hole was still a concept, but just in a weird fucking kind of in so many different cultural ways. Before we kind of discovered that there's that. Yeah, I just find that very interesting. But I definitely agree with you there. Like. You're not just studying magic. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to get another book on Wicca. Like you're studying life.
Yep.
You're studying life, and of course you should. You always need to be, somewhat versed in history. I think for all of us is always good, but then again, everybody's own curriculum is, I read every book about the Grateful Dead. Everybody's curriculum is different, but I certainly agree with you that, the duty of the magician, certainly the duty, like culturally, like as we fit into our individual, our local scene or whatever, and how we support them. We are supposed to be out there, like learning about new shit, having new ideas, being on the cutting edge of these concepts, like consciousness and death.
Yeah, just because
the heavy stuff.
You're following a shamanic path. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to wait around for someone to pass you down everything in an oral tradition. Read a fucking book.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree with you there. Right on.
So so I love that about biocentrism, that it had some basic science to it, but it didn't really explain everything.
Right.
I liked how in the end of the book he did kind of start going towards what happens after death.
Oh, he gets to it. Death doesn't happen because time's an illusion, so don't worry about it. Period.
No, don't worry about it.
That's essentially where it goes.
Right. I was reading some tidbits about the next book. It sounds like it's a little bit, I don't want to say more interesting, but a little bit more fun. So I'm looking forward to digging into that next.
I liked the first one better myself because this one gets mathy. But again, everybody's, you might love, they're both great. So you might love this one more. I feel like there's definitely, he gets into more science in this one. Like he throws some but it's also, again, it's explained in a way like Hawking's first book is hard to get through. He's not great at like the history of the universe or whatever, Big Bang, that one in the 80s. He's not great at explaining it to like plebs like me that just don't get like advanced astrophysics, and how and the math of it all. Whereas like Lanza's able to definitely refine it a little bit more. You're able to kind of get through it and understand it in more simple terms, which I think is important. Because when you're talking about these universal concepts and stuff, it's just really heady stuff. And not all of us, are on that intellectual, level to be able to contemplate a lot of the math and the shit that these guys fucking do, frankly. And you get to these advanced quantum equations. I will never be able to do that, period. Yeah. But then again, I can do a fucking piece of art that'll blow your fucking mind apart. So, everybody's got their own talents, but I do like that he makes it if basic understanding of science and, you've done some meditation essentially some one time or another in your life and pondered the universe, you're going to be able to kind of get through it. And that being said too, all of his writing is way over the head of a lot of people, so he talks he mentions a couple times in there, it's like, this is the kind of shit that we get to think about when we're rich white people with a lot of time and like, you know, don't have to worry about getting water every day. You know, like, so it's almost like these higher advanced forms of philosophy is very much a privilege. It's a privilege to even be fucking with this kind of shit. I mean, frankly, because you look at how a lot of the world lives today. I mean, you're talking about just basic wake up in the morning and get water for a lot of people, getting food, any kind of shelter. I mean, in entire nations almost of people that live in circumstances that don't allow them to spend a whole lot of time contemplating the universe and studying these different things, and wouldn't have access to all the information that we do. The internet alone. You know, there's a lot of internet now in the world, more than there was, but there's a lot of people that are never going to have that in their lives. There's several generations of people in a lot of nations that are never going to have that. So I feel like that is a bit humbling in a lot of ways. You know, that we're able to kind of do this, you know, in this day and time. And, you know, it's a little bit of responsibility. It's like, you know, we should be kind of studying other things. We should be doing things like writing books and having these conversations so that it ignites other people's ideas. Because frankly, once we all figure out that we're one consciousness on this earth and that we are fucking connected, it's, you know, then we'll start acting like that and it'll solve a lot of our fucking problems. And maybe we can have this utopian future, you know, anything's possible. But certainly it's nice for us to be able to have the luxury of contemplating the universe and souls, you know, in air-conditioned and heated houses.
So, okay. So going on, you know, bringing this back to EMK. So I think we have nailed down consciousness at this point. I think I have a pretty good idea of what it is. I hope our listeners have a good idea. If they have questions, please feel free to throw it at us. But
I think we got a bubble of our philosophy of what it is.
Yeah.
It's more or less not nailed down because it can't be, but yeah.
How do you influence it? How do you change consciousness? What are the keys to that?
Well, I mean, do you want to talk, are we talking about techniques of altering consciousness? Like,
well, you know, we could do that. You know, we were also talking about how it is an art in and of itself. That it is art, and art is that changing consciousness on a deeper level that's beyond language.
I like that. Okay, here's something. I was thinking about this earlier, and I wanted to say EMK is very much the expression of that stuff individually, but also as a group mind. And this is what makes EMK unique. This is what makes OM unique. When you look at it, if you take the two, like what I consider the two great masters of the last century, you got Aleister Crowley and you got Austin Spare. Now, Crowley had a lot of good shit, and he had his shit together, but the problem with Crowley is he got messianic, and it all became about, like, his vision. And yeah, it was do what thou wilt, but in structure that I'm giving you, which was a very structured thing. And you think about, like, Crowley and like Liber Vulgarum, where he just slashed people's wrists if they said the wrong words, like, you know. And you know, this is kind of a little bit, it's too totalitarian to really you know, so I think that was kind of his mistake. Like, he should have pushed everybody to have their own book of the law. Like, everybody should have been required to like have their own session and like bring some kind of weird, right, like that would have been better. But no, it was like, okay, just take my genius. Now, Spare was right about correcting that error and saying it's all about the individual person. Like, you make your own sigils, you make your own fetishes. Like, each magician has his own set of symbols, which is like powerful to him, and it's not going to matter what's in any other book. Like, just use the techniques, and like invented sigil magic essentially. And he was more or less right too, except for he was a complete solitary magician. What you have in EMK and OM is the combination kind of both. You have like it is a fraternity, as a group thing around kind of one central idea, which is the Gutter Bible to start. But again, the Gutter Bible is not written by any of us, and it wasn't found by one person. It was found by a group of people. And everything that we have ritually, the grid, the emergent pentagram ritual, all the parts of that, all that came from rituals, not by one person, but by several people, you know, incorporating the net filter, which we talk about all the time, which is using different people from different countries and different areas and different backgrounds to slowly cull the information forth. So what we end up with is Spare's model, where each individual person has his own set of sentient letters or sigils or whatever. You're a necromancer. He's does My Little Pony stuff all the time. It's whatever. And then, but the together part is what is the EMK. It's as a group thing, we come slowly to develop this overall system, rather than with Crowley just one person developing a system for everybody, or Spare just developing a system just for himself personally. We're doing something different and unique in this approach.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that the emergent part is we're trying to bring together how we're merging our different perceptions, our different consciousnesses into a group paradigm that we can work together. And it's a hard process to describe because it's very organic, because I might go to a tribal meeting and we do a ritual about, let's say, My Little Pony, okay? And part of that ritual is like painting by, throwing paint and doing subconscious work that way. Well, I might take that technique and bring it home and say, okay, well, what are my spirits telling me? Try that subconscious technique. And then when we go back, I can say, this is what the spirits have to say. And we can apply this technique to different things.
Right.
And pretty soon that technique becomes something that's inherent in the group, and we've all tried it.
Right. This gets exactly to something, and it's funny you bring up ponies because, I know you both know and absolutely adore and love my Little Ponies rituals.
Yeah, not really.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
But the one, okay, so you remember the initial one where you kind of had a sharing thing where each person would go around personal thing, and that almost kind of comes from like the toast and boast tradition in black magic circles, where you pass around the drinking horn, each person like toasts or boasts something they've done cool. But it's kind of that transformed into what we saw with Katie's ritual of Chinese New Year with the Chinese finger traps, where she had incorporated that part of everybody going around and sharing something vulnerable about themselves to then bring everybody together. So now this has become like, and she's written another ritual which essentially kind of uses that same. So now this has become like a repeating pattern, essentially a good way to do group ritual, in different paradigm settings. We're talking about a technique that's kind of passive. What do you think?
Honestly, like what I think about it is it's really like developing a language between a particular group of people, as opposed to, to take it back to another music analogy, as opposed to having a set song that you play the exact same way every single time you get together. You can play a jam this one way, and then the next time you're like, oh, I really liked that one riff we hit during, the third part of this movement. I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to work on something for the next time, and then you build off of that the next time. So it's more of an evolutionary sort of language rather than a strict, dialogue that you have each time, So I think that's what's neat about it, really.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. What do you think, James?
Yep, I think we've talked about that, and eventually we're going to have to get into what these techniques are, at least some of the basic techniques. Of course, there's stuff that we all know as being practicing magicians, as evocation, invocation, enchantment, divination, all those things. But maybe the general public does not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, obviously. Well, and again, that was just kind of, I guess leading up towards what we're talking about, to be thorough with everything. The main techniques to talk about, we could start with, the basic yoga stuff, which is the kind of, the citadel of black magic is built from stone mined through the disciplines of yoga. What we're talking about here is not like you say in the book, James, it's not like your go to the mall, do, yoga and fancy pants with all the soccer moms type yoga. We're talking the more old school, although hatha yoga, of course, should be done. You should be doing body stuff. That's great. But the very basics of meditation. So you're talking about breath control, any pranayama where you're counting breaths, and just, doing breath counting, that kind of stuff, stilling your mind, and that, moving that on to like visualizing things in your mind's eye. All these tools are like essentially these mental push-ups that you kind of do. But the breath work stuff, intonation is a real big one. When they talk in the magical texts about when you're doing rituals, when you vibrate the god names, essentially, that's paramount to doing magic, especially in groups, because it's a vocal thing. Mantras are great. Mantras are, probably the easiest and best way. If I was going to be like somebody just straight up has never done any magic and is like, hey, this seems interesting. What's the most, where can I start? What's the most basic thing I can do? Sigils and mantras, for any kind of basic desire, come up with something like, you want to, focus your energy more towards learning about, magic and developing that part of your life, or something, some phrase like that. Make yourself a sigil, which is a pictorial representation of your desire. That's pretty much anybody that is interested in sigils can just Google sigil magic at this point. Most people are familiar. Most people from all traditions at this point are familiar with sigils, whether you're Wiccan or you work in the OTO or you're a solo practitioner or you're doing even Voodoo. I mean, everybody knows almost sigil magic at this point. It's a way of making, there's tons of different ways of doing it. The traditional way with the rose cross, where you can kind of trace a sigil over the letters to make the words, and then you've got the combination of words, automatic drawing stuff, and then the mantra is just, of course, taking that same desire and recreating it in a verbal pattern, making a word or a couple words of power, and focus, sit still, breathe for a while, center yourself. If banishing, that'd be great. But I mean, if you're talking about very basics, center yourself, do some breathing for a while, clear your mind as much as you can, look at the sigil and say the mantra, and just do that. You get yourself 15 minutes of that and you're going to have a light Gnostic state. And that's a great way to start. I mean, that's some of your basic stuff right there.
So to bring it back around to the original subject, we've talked about yoga, and we've talked about, practicing it in order to achieve altered states of consciousness. I almost feel like, from my experience and looking at it from a perspective of biocentrism, that yoga, what it really does is put you more in tune with the universal consciousness. It's kind of like tuning your instrument.
Well, yoga is union, or yoga means union. Isn't that the eight lectures quote from Crowley?
That's the spiel, yeah.
Right, and that's essentially, that's essentially true. I think you're right. It kind of it realigns your frequency, if you will, with cosmic consciousness, more or less. And I mean, not everybody can meditate all the time, every day. It's hard to get in stuff, but I mean, even just breath stuff and motionlessness. I mean, you just find a few minutes during each day to kind of calm yourself and do that, and it's going to be beneficial, certainly.
Yeah, I think people will be surprised just how little is necessary to get benefits. I mean, just 5 minutes, and you'll start getting benefits from that.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, you want to try to aim to go longer, as long as you can. Tune that instrument well. Be a virtuoso if you can. But if you're doing 5 minutes, man, that means you can at least come to the party and join the jam.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we're not tantric Buddhists. We're fucking black magicians. So like, and I mean, I think all this stuff is kind of like, a lot of this stuff is so important in the beginning, really, because you kind of develop that skill, like staring at a single point on a wall. Like, I don't spend a lot of time doing that anymore. I might occasionally just be like, I'm doing this activity, I'll just like do my old, magician eye on this one point. But back in the day, I used to do that all the time. And so you develop some of these kind of skills, and I mean, all this stuff is really important when you're starting out with magic.
I'm almost kind of sad because on the wall behind me, I used to have like a square that I actually put up while I was doing my original MMM that I was staring at that I would use. And then, I had that up until like 2 weeks ago. I finally took that down.
Yeah. Well,
it's useful.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, the basic meditative stuff is all real important. We talk a lot about that stuff in the book, I guess. There's some basic practice in there, and visualization too. I'd say moving on from the basic stuff, take a step up. And you're talking about visualizations, sound, concentration, stuff like that. Being able to recreate like pictures or sounds in your mind, and this is something that I still can't make a perfect apple in my mind and reach out with my astral arm and grab the apple and take a bite of it astrally and taste it and then put the floating apple back in front of me and see it perfectly and feel all those sensations.
You can't?
But I can mess through parts of it. I tried it enough times that I get these little glimpses of these little ghost kind of parts. And that's something you develop for the rest of your life. Dr. Dave had I was thinking about this the other day. He had one of his visualizations. We talk about like building the astral temple, which is just essentially a long series of interconnected visualizations. And he had an island and a beach on an island that he would go to. And he's like, he was way into NLP and he was a psychiatrist. So he did a lot of this path working stuff, working with his students, and was, he was a fucking doctor at it. And so he's like, man, I've got this thing. It's basically, I just bam, a couple seconds, close my eyes, and I'm like on this island, on a lawn chair, on a beach, and it's perfect. And that's like his Zen place. And that's kind of just another example of deep visualizations, and you use that a lot in therapy with people, of course, where you have them, visualize being in a certain place. A lot of this stuff, it's done really well in groups. The NLP stuff is great. Pathworkings are great. If you've got somebody that can do a good pathworking, if you can, essentially what a pathworking is somebody walks you through a series of, adventures on the astral plane, and you visualize yourself doing these things. But if it's done well, it leads to a light meditative and a light, hypnotic state, in which you can really access a lot of what we would consider the powers of magic and stuff when we're messing with the subconscious. Some of the techniques are, different color clouds that flash different colors and then count numbers backwards. Another common method that I really like is the staircase, where you're walking down a staircase and it's a certain color, and it is, it has 10 steps and it's 9, 8, 7, 6, and so on. And then you get to a landing and you turn and it's another set of steps and they're another color. And you kind of walk through that. If somebody's skilled at it, you can get into a really good state, and you can work any different paradigm doing that kind of stuff. The vision in the voice, Crowley's big masterpiece, Vision of the Voice, where he actually sees Babylon, that's all pretty much just his own path working. Like his own.
And we do have coming up in the next book, Emergent Magick. Part of it is called Liber Fondendia, the Book of Mining, or Liber F, where we go through a bunch of these practices and things that people can do, basic yoga stuff that works all the way up to, building that your own citadel of the mind, which, is essentially what Dr. Greason's beach was, except, he was cool and made it a beach. So perhaps it's in a first draft format right now, but I could probably put a link to that in the show notes. If people go and check out the website here in a few days, I'll have that up, and you can see, the basic exercises that we think that people should be starting out with. Definitely not the end of, but something to start out with.
Right. What do you think, Zai, about as far as like techniques and whatnot?
Honestly, I think you guys have covered quite. I mean,
Are we
if you're
hitting
just
it?
I mean, you're hitting it. If I'm just here to keep you guys honest, I'm just gonna say that was that's pretty solid. I mean, you went over the basics. I mean, meditation, I think, is hugely important. That's kind of the foundation of all of it. Is just sit your ass still for a moment, and that's gonna. I mean, that in and of itself, if you're just starting out, is going to start to change some things. But yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of it. Visualization,
just breathing, man. Breathing's a big. Like
Yeah.
I remember, like our good
breath control.
our good friend Toast that came out to Babylon with us and was, had his life changed. That was like one of his main takeaways. He's like, man, you know what? I just like realized I'm doing all these rituals and stuff, man. Is just like breathe, man. Just like
just fucking breathe.
Do breath work for like a couple minutes, and like holy shit, like it's just, I mean, it just the basic stuff like that. Yeah, it is really very important, and I think that all of these techniques can be, this is all like at your own pace type stuff. I think I don't like the intimidation factor of some of the published stuff. I mean, it seems sometimes you get authors that seem to come off more like, if you're not going to be doing all this fucking work, you're not going to basically be making any kind of progress. And it's kind of like daunting, like, God, I don't have like 90 minutes a day to sit still and meditate. I got 3 fucking kids, blah, and it's like, it's not what it's all about. There's not a parameter, there's not a level. What's important is that you just kind of dedicate yourself to this and stick with it. Journaling is important. We can certainly talk about journaling. Like, my fiance, Katie, has just started her journal. Although she had kind of journals before, but this being more like specifically a magic journal. And she's, she had asked me how to do it, and I kind of, I probably just didn't give her very good answers because I kind of suck. But I was like, she's reading Don Craig's book, and I'm like, honestly, like, I started by using his method, and like, of course, in there, he's like, you write down the phase of the moon, you write down where the astrological sign that the moon is under, and then like the time that you do stuff, and blah blah blah. And she's like, "How do you do the phase?" And I'm like, "No, I don't do the phases of the moon in my magical journal anymore." But I started it that way. I mean, I legitimately have 2 or 3 books full of months of that shit. So, there's definitely
the internet
literature.
does make that shit a lot easier.
What's that?
The internet does make that shit a lot easier.
Internet makes it easier. I mean, I think, the magic journal is more or less self-explanatory. I mean, you keep track of like the magic that you do that day, and, keep a dream journal. I'm terrible about dream journaling. Like I keep one off and on throughout the years. And when I keep one, it's awesome. And when I don't, I'm like, why the fuck aren't you keeping a dream journal? But certainly, like, especially when you're talking about starting out, that's essential, because you'll start to see your magic stuff happen in your dreams and stuff line up. That's one of the first keys that your stuff's working. And that'll always happen. Like I still like that's when I know my shit works now, as like, years later, as as an experienced and traveled magician. I mean, I'm shitty about writing it down, but I'll get up on a Sunday and be like, fuck, okay, like this was okay. And like today so I sent somebody a text today, and they're like, hey, I was taking a nap a minute ago, and I just had a dream that I was meeting you somewhere, and I woke up and blah, blah. So it's like, I mean, that dream stuff's real important, especially at the beginning. Like if you've never kept a dream journal, definitely do it. Try and do it. I know it's hard. It's just, you get rushed in the morning. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of times you can't remember your dreams, but if you can do it, you'll definitely benefit from it. It's one of the main things that I suggest to people starting out magic. Keep a dream journal, because that's so important to your, and over time you end up like, I really like, I feel like I generally work within my dreams a lot and stuff. Like there's a correlation a lot when in magic and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know that kind of before I kept dream journals, like back 98, 99, when I was really starting to get into magic pretty heavily.
And I'd also like to point out, in Libre F that we're putting out, one thing that we do is try to make those practices also applicable to working within a group. So you can take these skills with you.
Right.
Like our meditation stuff starts out with rhythm. Get a drum, get a tambourine, get a rattle, or clapping, or stomping your feet, or whatever. Going in a continuous rhythm is a form of meditation, And then, later on, you've got the practice. Hey, now you bring it to a group. I got, my rattle, my drum, for dancing around the fire. And then, of course, you mentioned vibration, that
Right.
kind of learning how to use your voice and your breath harmonically, which is a really important part in a lot of rituals. Working on that to start with, because that's something that you're going to bring to a group. So, don't think of this stuff as this is just the things that I'm going to do when I'm sitting in my basement alone. These are skills that you're developing that are going to go and go with you.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it every time, and we'll continue to. This paradigm is primarily it's a paradigm about getting out and doing magic with other people. So it's a group paradigm. Yeah, certainly you can start out, on your own and doing stuff for a little bit. But yeah, the first real step towards magic is, reaching out and getting hooked up with other people. And I wish I I wish I had done that a little bit earlier, maybe, or maybe not. Could go either way. But certainly when I was starting out with magic, there's so much literature out there that's like, you don't really need groups and blah, blah, and groups are going to be, it's going to be scary, and people are in there, they're not legit, and like there was very little like in any of the books. It was like, yeah, I mean, it's really easy to go out, just find some people that are into magic and just start doing some weird shit. Nobody was saying that. It was all these warnings about either straight up bashing certain groups, or just laying out a dozen different stereotypes, like sexual predators and people that were totally fake, and like all this other shit. And like we're saying the opposite of that. And it's like, you might meet some fucking freaks and it doesn't work out and you just don't work with them anymore. But more or less, like, yeah, you just go out there and like you keep saying, James, I mean, form your own group. Like, don't go out and necessarily try and, and join up with something else when you've got, you can certainly do it yourself.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means, what exactly the structure of OM is, because I feel like we haven't hit a lot on that, and there's a lot of talk about this whole like everybody can just do whatever they want and be whoever. While we are like very much of that spirit, like there's an integrity to what we're doing here. So the way that I see it is, we as the PRs are the ones who publish as OM. We have the Gutter Bible itself, the physical Gutter Bible. When we're gone, it'll get passed on to whoever the next PRs are. And we've got the rights to publish that. Now, as far as beyond that, anybody can do any kind of magic with it. Anybody can have an OM temple. I think we've talked about having 3 people. So if you've got 3 people and you're doing magic together, as long as you're doing the emergent pentagram, you can essentially be an OM temple. Now, there's not official and unofficial, really. You can kind of do your own thing. But the next step would be to be in contact. I guess you could call contacted temples. And contacted temples are people that are in contact with us, that are like, hey, okay, that we either meet or have face chats with, and, are aware of who they are, of where they are, of some of the work that they're doing, and possibly, depending on what we see, some of these contacted temples we might be working with in the grander scheme. That's essentially what we're trying to get to. We want to be able to have enough separate temples that we can do large group meetings, national large group meetings, international large group meetings. That's, of course, the goal of any organization. So at that point, if we're in contact with you, you're either, if people are going to be invited or not invited is just going to depend on each personal person. And there's not going to be anybody that's going to be denied to do whatever that is. But the PR is essentially just going to be the ones that do the main organizing, and that's kind of the way that I see it. And as far as like, the only worry is, what if you get 3 total whack jobs that start calling themselves and they do contact us and are just so completely crazy or are criminal, what do we do then? And I guess that's kind of just going to have to be our own discretion. I don't think it's right to try and sit down and be like, these are the laws and the things that will be blah, 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 this and that, because it's not what we're about. It's an organic type of thing, But more or less to say, if you go out and you're doing this magic and you're cool and you get in contact with us, we can start doing larger group things. Beyond that, there's of course fucking Babylon, which is at this point essentially the OM world meeting every year. Anybody can come out there and work with us. We will be doing OM stuff all fucking weekend. You just find me or fucking James and we'll do some weird shit straight the fuck off. So that's open to anybody. That's open to anybody. And again, we've talked about there's a Sabbat there too, and it'd be great to meet some people that, you know, listen to the podcast and come out and like, hey, you know, let's do this and that. So
now, okay, so just to break you off a little, you're talking about people who want to work within the Gutter Bible paradigm, who want to be part of the Order of Emergent Magi, which is, you know, beyond Emergent Magick. It's like the first Emergent Magick group, you know, and right. I think you should. I think people should, because, you know, you're thinking, okay, working with the Gutter Bible. Do I want to work with the Gutter Bible? Well, yeah, you do. I mean, but that's my opinion. But also, I mean, the Gutter Bible is so open. There's so much stuff that you could do with it that you know.
I kind of look at it, it's almost like a Rorschach or something. I mean, any person can pull any different thing, and it's almost like a test. Like, what can you pull out of that and bring to us? Because, like, with our experience, all three of us have individually like pulled different things out of it that have been very personal to ourselves through different workings. And that's anybody else. Danik has the same thing. Sora Panthera, the same thing. Anybody else that's directly contacted with it has come out with their own little fractal of it that's separate from the main emergent paradigm of Mungloth and the grid. It's just its own its own personal thing, and that's real important. And I think the more that we get magic done with that, the more like different glyphs that we pull out of it, the cooler the magic is all going to be. And it gives us one kind of common thing to work around that we're all working towards permanently towards the future. And that's what's different too about, say, OM versus some other magical groups where everybody still has their own paradigm and they basically just get together and show their own paradigm. But there's not one underlying thing that everybody is working on forever. Like with EMK, there is, and that the Gutter Bible part of it is the part that is always being developed and is always there, and is like everybody is putting a little piece of themselves, or the consciousness and their magic, into that part, that branch of the paradigm, and that's the center of the tree. And then all these other branches and leaves and like feathers and shit that make our tree cool is what each individual person is doing as a magician, because we're all in different groups. You know, all doing different paradigms, and we're all experimenting with different things. But David, that's kind of the continuation, that and the ancestral stuff.
David, you're probably the least enraptured with the Gutter Bible out of the three of us.
Fair enough.
What would you say is, why would you say that people should try working with it?
Honestly, because it's I mean, it's bad. I think that you know, after my experiences with the paradigm itself, I would say, yeah, go for it. And like you said, with the whole Rorschach thing, I mean, that's a very apt description of what it is. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, gazing into a real fucked up crystal ball that someone found in the gutter somewhere. But yeah, I just think the endless potential of it makes it a really spark for creativity and emergent magic. So
yeah, there's literally no end to the ways you can interpret the pages. I mean, you can just trace a sigil off any of it and just invoke it blindly and just end up with whatever that person's net filter is, whatever the consciousness of those people doing that, whatever their backgrounds is, doing that ritual at that time, that's gonna, you know, whatever their personal beliefs, where they are in their lives at that point, you know, their sobriety level or lack of at that point, all this is gonna have to do, whether it's hot or cold, it's all going to have to do a little bit more to do with affecting that and seeing what the outcome of the ritual is. And so much of the Gutter Bible is like it's about getting information. Gutter Bible magic is it's more the mystical pursuit. It's not typically done like, oh, we need this, so therefore we're going to do this. Although we are developing that arm of it with the Grid of Spirits, which is more like a cookbook, like I need a car, so and so does car stuff. Like, you know, but from a personal level, it's like each person is pulling out like their own kind of thing that they can use. I find that really fucking, that it's just makes it unique. It makes it
Jason,
unique that way.
Are you recommending that people do drugs and go out and invoke strange spirits randomly?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying don't.
Make your own choices in life.
That
Nobody.
I think this is the only. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to Magic podcast, and I read books on magic. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. I think I've heard a lot of people say do the opposite.
I'll be the voice of reason here. Make your own choices, but make sure that they are informed choices. Know at least a little bit about what the fuck you're getting yourself into, whether it's the gutter Bible or that piece of paper you just stuck in your fucking mouth.
And I'm not saying I'm disagreeing with you. I'm just saying there's a lot of people out there who will disagree with you, and I don't know what to tell them other than, you could try it your way, you could try it our way, and see which one works better for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think again, the endless ways that you can interpret the gutter Bible, and it's an information seeking technique that you're kind of diving into it. It's more a pursuit of mysticism. You're getting information back, like personal keys that you can use yourself or that the group can use, that like gives you more about like your personal power. It's almost like it's very much is scrying. It is almost like the work of divination whenever you're pulling out and working with it. And that's what makes it interesting and makes it, more towards the continuity of that working. Whereas, say you're going to get together and do 5 rituals in a night, you might do 4 for different things that you need, or, we did, the thing, the heart thing, which was really cool, a healing thing. You might do a couple other things, and then you might do a gutter Bible thing as well. And that's like kind of the thing that always transfers. And that's not so much like this is to get a result, as more like now let's like kind of go explore the other side and like see where our consciousness can stretch to and what kind of like bits and pieces we can pull back from the other side.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we just hit the hour mark, believe it or not. Do you have anything else that you want to add for tonight's podcast?
Oh, well, it's been great. It's been great, guys. Absolutely.
Go out, read Biocentrism, and do your yoga.
Yeah, read Biocentrism. Check it out.
Don't do drugs and stay in school.
Thank you for being the voice of reason for us. All right, I'm gonna hit the big red button here. If you two want to stay on the line for a minute, we'll do a business meeting, and good night to everybody else.
All right.